we decided to recruit and study a group of otherwise healthy amateur soccer players, because these are people who basically enjoy spending time hitting their head repeatedly against another object, right, the soccer ball. And that seemed to be an opportunity for us to study the effect of repeated blows to the head, something that we typically don't see in your average concussion patient. We brought them in to look at three things. First, how much heading of the soccer ball, and heading is where the player uses their head to deflect or play the ball during the game. So we wanted to know how much heading they've done in the past year. We brought them in to the MRI scanner to look at their brain, and specifically to look for changes that we've seen in people who have concussion or mild traumatic brain injury. We presented the findings of the study at the meeting of the Radiological Society of North America, and our key findings were that in people who did the most heading, we were much more likely to find changes in the brain that were extremely similar to what we see in people with concussion or mild traumatic brain injury. The second finding was that it was not a smooth or continuous relationship, but there was actually a threshold level where if you head the ball below this threshold, you seem to not have these brain injury-like changes. And if you exceed that threshold, then you would be much more likely to have these brain injury-like changes. Now, the threshold that we found varied slightly depending on the part of the brain we were looking at. It hovered around 1,000 times per year, which may seem like a lot, but we had players who were heading the ball far in excess of 6,000 times a year. An additional component of this study of soccer players involved performing cognitive testing to determine how well they performed on tests of things like attention and memory. Our findings, which were recently presented by my colleague Dr. Molly Zimmerman, showed that the more heading the soccer players had done in the past year, the more likely they were to do poorly in terms of cognitive performance, especially on tests of attention. Putting together the imaging findings and the cognitive findings, this simply adds additional evidence that not only can we see something in the brain that looks like it might be a traumatic consequence of heading the soccer ball a lot or perhaps too much, but that there might be real-life consequences to that problem, to that exposure as well. So people often ask, what does all this mean? If I'm a soccer player, if I have a child who's a soccer player, what do I need to do? And the answer is, on the one hand, we don't really know. This is preliminary information that is very compelling, and I think really pushes us to do further research to understand what the problem is and how we can deal with it. That sets the stage for a potentially protective intervention, which has an important parallel in the history of sports injuries, and that's actually in Little League baseball, where Little League pitchers in past times were very prone to getting tears of the rotator cuff in the shoulder. And studies were done and rules were implemented so that by limiting the amount of pitching those players did, they no longer were at risk for those types of injuries. The hopeful message of the study is that there likely seem to be a safe range of parameters within which you can play the game and even head the ball. And I really believe that it's incumbent on the people who are in control of and managing and encouraging soccer play, such as youth soccer organizations, to get involved and be at the forefront of doing the research that will define the safe parameters and determine if, what, and how it's safe for this type of play to continue.